I had been waiting 6 weeks for that appointment. Not because the specialist was unavailable, because my primary care physician had wanted to confirm, first, that the referral was necessary, and then because confirming it required blood work and a 24-hour urine collection and a follow-up appointment to discuss the results. And by the time all of that had been completed and the referral written and the specialist's office contacted, 6 weeks had passed. In those 6 weeks, I had continued going to work. I had continued driving the 38 minutes each way. I had continued doing what hospice nurses do, sitting with people in the specific hours that most of the world prefers not to think about, administering comfort where cure is no longer the language, holding the space between living and whatever follows it with the steadiness that the work requires. I am good at steadiness. It is in some ways the thing I am best at. My patients do not need me to be theatrical or emotional. They need me to be present and calm and precise, and I am those things. It is the primary thing my 12 years in hospice nursing have built in me, and it is also something I brought to the work rather than learn from it. A quality that was formed, I think, in the years before I became a nurse, in the years when I was learning what it meant to watch someone I loved move through the passage I now help others navigate. I drove to Meridian Medical Center on a Tuesday morning in November. The nephrology clinic was on the 4th floor of the East Building. I knew this because I had looked it up and written the directions in the small notebook I keep in my bag. I am the kind of person who writes things down. 12 years of hospice nursing reinforces the habit because precision matters in the work I do, and imprecision has consequences. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I walked down the corridor toward the clinic entrance. The doctor was coming out of a side office when I approached the registration desk. He was in his 40s, in a white coat with his name embroidered on the breast pocket, carrying a chart that he was reading as he walked. He looked up from the chart when I reached the desk. He looked at me. He looked at the registration area. He looked back at me, and then he stepped between me and the desk. "Ma'am," he said. His voice had the particular quality of someone delivering a conclusion they have already reached before the other person has spoken. "We don't treat people like you here. This is a private specialist practice." A pause. "Leave before I call security." I stood very still. 2 nurses at the station behind the desk had stopped moving. A patient seated in the waiting area to my left was looking at his phone very carefully. A medical assistant near the copy machine had gone still. No one said a word. I looked at the doctor. I looked at the desk behind him, where the registration clerk, a young woman who had made eye contact with me briefly before looking away, was studying the surface of her desk. I said nothing. I did not move. I do not know exactly what I was waiting for. I have thought about this since. I think I was simply not yet ready to leave, not out of defiance exactly, but because something in me needed another moment to complete the process of understanding what had just happened. 12 years of hospice nursing teaches you that the moments that require the most from us are often the moments we cannot respond to immediately. The right response sometimes needs a breath first. I was taking that breath when the footsteps came from the corridor behind the desk. They were not hurried. They were the footsteps of someone walking with purpose, the specific rhythm of a person who has been told something and is moving to address it, not running but not strolling. They came from the direction of the administrative suite at the far end of the corridor. The man who came through the door behind the registration desk was in his late 50s. He had silver hair and the kind of build that suggests a former athlete working against the natural softening of time. He was in a white coat with 3 lines of embroidered text on the breast pocket, the length of embroidery that indicates rank. He walked through the door and into the corridor. He looked at the registration area. He looked at me. He stopped. He stopped so completely and so suddenly that the medical assistant near the copy machine looked up from whatever she had been studying. The doctor, who had blocked my way, turned slightly at the change in the room's quality. The man with the silver hair looked at me for a long moment. Something was happening in his face. A rapid internal movement, recognition or recalibration, or both. Then he turned to the doctor beside him. He leaned close. He whispered something. I heard it, and my whole body went cold. Before I tell you what he said, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Now, let's begin. My name is Carol Bennett. I am 47 years old. And the thing you need to know about me before you understand what happened in that corridor is what I gave away 6 years ago and why. My husband Michael was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease at 31 years old. It is a genetic condition. His father had had it, and his father's father, and it progresses over time in the specific and relentless way of conditions that are present from birth and that announce themselves only after decades of patient preparation. By the time Michael was 43, his kidneys were functioning at 18% of normal capacity. By 45, the number had dropped to 11. He was on dialysis 3 times a week, 3 4-hour sessions connected to a machine that did what his kidneys could no longer do, that cleaned his blood with the efficiency of a good machine and the total absence of what a body does it with, which is quietly, continuously, invisibly, while you sleep and eat and live. I was not a match for Michael. I had been tested when the numbers became critical. Blood type, tissue typing, cross-match, the full battery of tests that determine whether one person can give another person a kidney safely. I had wanted to donate with a desperation that I have never fully been able to describe, the specific desperation of a person who wants to do something and is told that the one thing they can do is not available to them. I was not a match. Michael was placed on the transplant waiting list. He waited. He died on a Wednesday morning in March, 8 years ago, of complications related to kidney failure. He was 47 years old. He had been on the waiting list for 2 years and 4 months. I was 41 years old and a hospice nurse of 6 years, and I held his hand when he died, which I was able to do because I was a hospice nurse and I understood what it looked like, and I did not need to look away. I kept working. I did not know what else to do, and the work, sitting with people, being present, not looking away, was the thing I knew how to do. So I did it. 2 years after Michael died, a transplant coordinator named Angela contacted me. Angela worked with a paired kidney exchange program, a system that allows people who want to donate but are not a match for their intended recipient to enter a chain. Your kidney goes to a stranger who needs it, and that stranger's would-be donor gives their kidney to someone else, and the chain can extend through multiple pairs, each donation enabling the next. It is one of the more elegant solutions that medicine has developed to a problem that is fundamentally about the mismatch between what people need and what the right people have to give. Angela had gotten my name from a colleague who had worked with Michael's case. She asked me if I had ever considered living donation. I had. I had considered it often in the 2 years since Michael died, the specific irony of having a healthy kidney and a husband who had needed one, and the fact that biology does not arrange itself around love or need. I told Angela yes. I was evaluated over 4 months, physical, psychological, social work review. I was found to be a suitable donor. I was explained the risks which are real and which I had read about extensively in the years I had been thinking about this. I was explained the process. I was explained that I would not know, initially, who received my kidney and that any information sharing would happen only with consent from both parties. I said yes. On a Tuesday in October, 6 years ago, I gave one of my kidneys to a stranger. I did not know who. I did not ask. Angela had offered to facilitate information sharing if both parties consented, and I had said yes to that as well. Not urgently, not as a condition, just yes if they wanted to know and I wanted to know. Then knowing seemed better than not knowing. I never received a request for contact. I had lived for 6 years not knowing where my kidney went. Sometimes I thought about it. Sometimes, particularly in the years immediately after, I would think about the stranger, somewhere living, and wonder what they were doing, whether they had gone back to work, or had children, or traveled to somewhere they had always wanted to go, whether the kidney was working well. I thought about it less as the years passed, not because it stopped mattering, but because life has a way of occupying the space where wondering lives, and I had a lot of life. I had my own health to manage now. In the 2 years since my donation, I had been monitored closely, as living donors are. My remaining kidney had been compensating, as remaining kidneys do, as biology designed them to do, and for 4 years the compensation had been adequate. In the last year, my numbers had shifted. Not dramatically, not urgently, but enough that my primary care physician had wanted me to see a specialist. Enough that I had a Tuesday morning appointment at Meridian Medical Center's nephrology clinic. The appointment that a doctor had just told me I was not going to be allowed to keep. I have thought many times about what was happening in the doctor's mind when he stepped between me and the registration desk. I do not fully know. What I can describe is what he saw. A woman in her late 40s, in a coat that is several years old, with the kind of tired quality that comes from working night shifts and managing health concerns and driving 38 minutes each way. Someone who does not look like the prototype of a private specialist's private patient. Someone who looked in the specific way that certain people read certain other people, like she might be in the wrong place. I understand the mechanism. It does not make it acceptable. I simply understand it. What I also understand, which took me longer to understand, is that I had stood there in that corridor and had not moved. Not out of confrontation. Not out of the expectation that something would change. Simply because something in me, the same quality that keeps me steady in the room when my patients' families are fragmenting, the same quality that held my husband's hand without looking away, had decided that I was not leaving. I was still deciding that when the man with the silver hair stopped and looked at me. His name was Dr. Jonathan Hayes. He was the chief of staff of Meridian Medical Center, a position he had held for 9 years. Before that, he had been the head of the transplant surgery department for 11 years, 20 years of his career devoted to the specific medicine of organ transplantation. He had a son named Daniel who is 29 years old and who is currently completing his 3rd year of residency in internal medicine. Daniel Hayes had received a kidney transplant 6 years ago. The kidney had come through the paired exchange program. Dr. Hayes had been present in the hospital on the day of his son's surgery. He had been on the other side of it for the first time in his career. Not the surgeon, not the physician, but the father sitting in a waiting room while someone else operated on his child. He had understood that day what his patients had always been living inside, and the understanding had changed him in ways he was still accounting for. The transplant coordinator, not Angela, a different coordinator on Daniel's end of the chain, had shared, with both parties' consent, the basic profile of the donor. Not name, not contact information. The profile, a woman, 41, a healthcare worker, who had entered the paired exchange program as an unpaired altruistic donor, meaning she had no intended recipient, no one she was trying to help specifically. She had simply donated her kidney to the chain because she could. Dr. Hayes had read this profile. He had also, with the coordinator's facilitation, received a photograph, not compulsory, offered as part of the information sharing process. A photograph of the donor, shared with her consent. He had kept the photograph, not on display, in a folder in his desk. The kind of keeping that is not about display, but about not letting something significant become abstract. He had looked at that photograph many times in 6 years. And on a Tuesday morning in November, he had come out of the administrative suite in response to a nurse's quiet alert that something unusual was happening at the nephrology clinic entrance, and he had walked through the door and looked at the corridor and seen, standing in front of the registration desk, the woman from the photograph. The freezing lasted 4 seconds. Then he turned to the doctor beside him. He leaned close. He said in a voice that was low and precise, and that I heard because I was standing close enough and because the corridor had gone very quiet. "Do you know who this woman is?" The doctor said he did not. Dr. Hayes said, "She is a living kidney donor. She entered the paired exchange program 6 years ago as an unpaired altruistic donor." A pause. "She is the reason my son is alive." He said it quietly. He said it to the doctor, not to me. But I heard every word. I have been a hospice nurse for 12 years. I have been present for the deaths of 147 people. I have held hands and adjusted medication and spoken the specific words that the specific moment required, and then driven home and gone to sleep and gotten up and done it again. I have built, through that work, a capacity for the large emotional events of human existence that I would describe not as numbness, but as containment, the ability to hold something significant without being overwhelmed by it in the moment. That capacity did not help me in that corridor. My whole body went cold in the way that cold is not the absence of temperature, but the presence of something too large for the body's usual processing. I felt it in my hands first, the specific trembling of hands that have gone beyond their load. Then in my chest. Dr. Hayes turned from the doctor to me. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, very simply, "Please come with me." The doctor who had blocked my way stood at the edge of the corridor. He did not speak. I followed Dr. Hayes down the corridor, past the administrative suite, to a conference room with a window that looked out at the city. He sat across from me. He said, "I've been thinking about how to say this for 6 years." I waited. He said, "My son received a kidney through the paired exchange program 6 years ago." He had been ill since he was 19. By the time of his transplant, he was 23, and we were running out of time. He stopped for a moment. The transplant coordinator shared with us, with your consent, the basic profile of the donor and a photograph.
He looked at me.
I recognized you when you walked in. I did not know what to say. I said, "How is he?" Something in Dr. Hayes's face changed. "He's in his 3rd year of residency," he said. "Internal medicine. He wants to work in nephrology." I looked at my hands. They were still shaking. I thought about Michael, about 3 dialysis sessions a week and the waiting list, and the Wednesday morning in March. I thought about Angela calling me 2 years later. I thought about October, 6 years ago, waking up in a hospital room with 1 kidney instead of 2, knowing only that I had given it to someone who needed it and that I would likely never know who. I thought about 6 years of not knowing. I thought about a 23-year-old who had been running out of time and who is now in his 3rd year of residency, becoming a nephrologist. "Tell me his name," I said. Dr. Hayes told me. I stayed at Meridian Medical Center for 3 hours that Tuesday. I did see the nephrologist, not the doctor who had blocked the corridor, who had been sent elsewhere by a message from Dr. Hayes's office, but another physician in the practice who reviewed my records and examined me and explained, with the specific calm of a good doctor, what my numbers were showing and what we would do about it. What we would do about it was manageable. The remaining kidney is compensating within acceptable parameters, and with monitoring and some dietary adjustments, the prognosis is good. Living donors are at a slightly elevated risk for certain kidney-related issues over time, which is why they are monitored. I am being monitored. That is, in the simplest terms, what the appointment was for and what it produced. I also, before I left, met Daniel Hayes. Dr. Hayes had made a call. Daniel was in the hospital that day for a rotation. He came to the conference room in his residence coat, 29 years old, serious and warm in equal measure, with a specific quality of attention that I recognized from my own work as belonging to someone who has been close to their own mortality and has decided to make something of the proximity.
He looked at me.
He said, "I didn't know it was going to happen like this." I said, "I didn't know it was going to happen at all." He sat down across from me. We talked for 40 minutes. He told me about the years before the transplant, the restriction, the careful management of a deteriorating condition, the specific way that illness at 23 inhabits a life that is supposed to be fully open. He told me about waking up after the surgery and understanding, gradually, what had changed. He told me about the decision to become a doctor, not immediately, not as the obvious next step, but slowly, as he came to understand what the gift of a functioning kidney actually meant in terms of what he was now able to do. He told me he had thought about the donor often. He said, "I never knew how to find you. The coordinator said I could put in a request for contact, and that it would go through if you were willing. I kept meaning to do it, and then not doing it. I didn't know how to say what I needed to say." I asked him what he needed to say. He looked at me. He said, "Thank you, and I'm sorry it cost you something, and I'm trying to use it well." The doctor, who had blocked my way, did not come to the conference room. I did not seek him out, and he did not seek me out, and I think that was the appropriate arrangement. He had made a judgment based on what he saw and had been wrong in a way that had specific consequences, and those consequences were between him and Dr. Hayes and the hospital's professional standards process. I do not spend much time on him. What I spend time on is this. I gave a kidney 6 years ago to a stranger in a chain that I entered because Michael had waited 2 years and 4 months on a list and had not survived the wait, and because I had a healthy kidney and someone else needed one, and the biology, this time, was not the obstacle. I gave it into the unknown, the way the exchange program requires, because the chain only works when people give without knowing exactly where it's going. I did not know it went to a 23-year-old in Charlotte who would spend the next 6 years becoming a nephrologist. I did not know that the 23-year-old was the son of the chief of staff of the hospital, where I would eventually need to go for my own kidney care. I did not know that on a Tuesday morning in November, in a corridor outside a nephrology clinic, a whispered sentence would reach me across 6 years of not knowing. I did not know any of that. I gave anyway. Michael would have been 55 this year. I think about him sometimes when I think about Daniel Hayes, not in a painful way, not in the way of grief that has not been processed, but in the specific way of understanding that the things that happen to us are connected to other things in ways we cannot always see. Michael's death did not save Daniel Hayes. But what came from Michael's death, the 2 years of sitting with loss, the conversation with Angela, the decision to enter the exchange program, that chain of things led to something that mattered. The kidney I gave traveled through a system and arrived somewhere it was needed, and 6 years later the person who received it is trying to use it well. He said so himself. He looked at me across a conference room table and said so. I drove home from Meridian Medical Center on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I called Angela on the drive. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I found out where the kidney went." She said, "Oh." I said, "He's going to be a nephrologist." There was silence on the line for a moment. Then Angela said, "That happens sometimes. Not always, but sometimes." I thought about that for the rest of the drive. There is something I want to say about the moment in the corridor when I did not move. I did not move because I had come too far and needed too much to let a judgment that was wrong send me back to my car. I had not known, standing there, that Dr. Hayes was about to come through a door. I had not known that anything was about to change. I had simply decided, in the way I have learned to decide things, that the right response to being told I didn't belong was to stay until I understood why I was being told that and whether it was true. It was not true. I belonged there for the most ordinary reason. I had an appointment. I had a referral. I had driven 38 minutes and waited 6 weeks and was 47 years old with 1 kidney and legitimate need of a nephrologist's care. I also belonged there for a reason I had not known about until a man with silver hair leaned close to a doctor in a corridor and said a sentence I was close enough to hear. Both of those things were true at the same time. The ordinary reason was enough. The other reason was a gift. I have spent 12 years sitting with people at the end of their lives, and I have learned that the things we give, the real ones, the ones that cost something, do not disappear when we stop being able to see where they went. They go somewhere. They do something. They arrive, eventually, where they were needed. Sometimes, if you stand still long enough in the right corridor, you find out where.